So when I was reading in Job 38, this is what I learned from it. And I read on and continue to read that when you are broken and you are in such pain like Job was, it's like you don't want anyone or anything to bother you. You don't want to hear it from nobody. You're just in silence. You're just in your pain and you're crying out to God and you're asking him why. You don't understand. None of it makes sense. You're just too broken. You're just too overwhelmed by God's presence to even ask anything, right? What I learned from these chapters, I wrote down in my notes, and I would like to share with you guys to encourage you guys what you can do when you feel this way. So through all of this that Job is going through, God speaks to Job out of the storm, right? In Job 38:1-4. And then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you understand. So Job's first response, he really feels too small, He feels too small to answer God, right? In Job 40, verse 3 and 5, Job answered the Lord, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. And that's what his response was. And God continues to question Job, showing his greatness to Job, even though his response was what he said. God continues to question him, right? In Job 40:41, God describes his power over creation, including mighty creatures like the behemoth and Leviathan, right? Proving his unmatched strength and wisdom. Then Job's final response, he repents and humbles himself in Job 42:1-6. Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things so wonderful for me to know. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust, ashes. And these chapters in Job is God's way of showing Job his majesty and his wisdom and his sovereignty. And when the Lord asks him from the whirlwind, basically to make his request, he was in his deepest pain in that moment at that time when God spoke to him. He could have made a request, for restoration, for healing. He could have made a request for anything that he wanted to make a request for. He had a chance in that moment at that time where he could have asked God for anything. Instead, he fell silent in his pain and his awe, but God still responded with restoration. Even Job didn't have a response for him. So even when you're like Job and you feel too broken, and when you feel so overwhelmed to speak, just know that you can come and you can have a request to God and he will answer, or you can prolong it just like Job did, because he was in so much pain that he was in awe. He was just so hurt that he didn't want to have a request. But knowing that you have the option to have a request, you could eliminate certain things from happening and prolonging the suffering if you know and trust and have faith that in these moments, that when you stay in God's presence and you have faith, that you know that God will bring you out of it. Because even though Job didn't have a request, God still showed up and God still restored him. But God didn't restore him until he rebuked the friends. God had to rebuke the friends first, because the friends were speaking to Job and they were not speaking rightly. So God had to step in for Job. And God had to tell them to offer up sacrifices. God had to have Job pray for them so that he will forgive them. So God made this request in Job 42, 7, 9. And after the Lord had spoke this to Job, that he was rebuking the friends, then later on, that's when, God began to restore Job afterwards in Job 42, 10, 17, I believe. So I'm here to encourage you and let you know that he will do the same for you. And just like Job was in so much pain. He was in silence, and Job could have asked God for anything. He had the opportunity to ask God for anything, and so do you. Job could have asked for relief. He could have asked for answers. He could have asked for restoration. He didn't. Instead, he said, I am unworthy. I'll put my hands over my mouth. So learn from this that if Job had the opportunity to ask for these things, so do you. So don't delay anything and ask God. Ask God, and he will reveal it to you. He will show you fast. And he will restore you and restore everything to you double. So I want to encourage you that if you are in pain and you don't even know what to pray, remember this one thing, that just like Job in his silence, just like Job, God can still move in your silence. But learn from this that you have the opportunity to ask God for restoration, ask him for answers, and believe and have faith and wait on his timing and stay in his presence. Because even though we lose it all, even though our health seems to be going down, even though our finances have been attacked, even though people have betrayed us and mocked us just as they did Job, when we were so used to being respected and honored for who we are and who we know we are. It may not make sense now, but I promise it will.